This podcast contains graphic content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
True North True Crime is produced on the territories of the Coast Salish people.
So I have no doubt that Wiseman will be captured. And it would be great if he is captured with the help also of your podcast, my newsletter, and the collaboration of people across Canada that have tuned in or seen this and say, hey, this is really bizarre. This is a sadistic murderer and we've got to get him off the streets. Whether it's in Toronto or it's in Bangkok or Istanbul, he's got to get off the streets. We have to get him off the streets. And that, in actual fact, I'm being quite adamant about this because I think it gives Canadians a really bad rap as well. I mean, the only thing we've heard about Canada in the last month is, we have like a really nasty creep that killed a 20-year-old single mother of a 3-year-old. Instead of saying, well, Canadians are coming to Colombia and they're doing this and they're that. The reputation of Canada had been dragged to the mud with this murder.
On February 4th, 2024, a 20-year-old mother hung out with an old friend in her hometown of Medellín, Colombia. Spending time with her old friend was a nice break from school, work, and motherhood. Later that day, her friend, who was a taxi driver, dropped her off at the apartment of her new boyfriend, a Canadian man in his 50s named Jesse Wiseman. Wiseman had recently moved to Colombia after meeting his new girlfriend online. The young woman's family became concerned when she didn't come home as scheduled. Several days later, neighbors reported a putrid smell emanating from Jesse Wiseman's apartment. With an uneasy feeling, the landlord entered the apartment with the young woman's family. Jesse Wiseman was nowhere to be found. As they made their way through the apartment, they found a suitcase, dripping with blood. In this episode, we explore the murder of Laura Lopera and the international hunt for the Canadian man, Jesse Wiseman. This is True North True Crime.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to True North True Crime. Thanks so much for joining us. If you're new to our podcast, welcome. And if you're a frequent flyer, we thank you for being here and supporting the podcast. If you want more True North True Crime, you can subscribe to TNTC Plus, where you get early release and ad-free episodes, as well as bonus content for under $5 a month. If you want to sample TNTC Plus, Apple does offer a 7-day free trial for you to check out. And of course, you can follow us on social media at TNTC Pod on Instagram or True North True Crime on Facebook. If you'd like to help out the podcast, we ask that you press follow or subscribe on whichever platform you are currently listening on, or you can write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, which helps with the visibility of our podcast. Lastly, if you've got a case suggestion for us, please send it along to truenorthtruecrime@gmail.com. We do prioritize cases that come to us from family members or close contacts of a case, but we consider all emails that we receive. With that, let's get into this week's episode.
So tonight we're talking about the February 2024 murder of 20-year-old Laura Lopera. So that's Laura as in Laura in the anglicized version. This case takes place in Medellín, Colombia, but has become an international story as the lead suspect is a 50-ish-year-old Canadian man who is currently on the run and may be hiding in Canada. In February of 2024, Laura's body was found hidden inside of a suitcase at the rented home of Jesse Wiseman in Medellín, Colombia. Jesse has been named as the primary suspect in her murder by the Colombian authorities, and an Interpol Blue Notice has been issued. This is a fast-moving story with new details coming out of Colombia over the past few months. One of our listeners actually reached out to us about this case, and we were surprised to see that there are only a handful of articles in Canadian media. Most of those articles are from Saltwire, a media company in Atlantic Canada, and their coverage has been great. However, the only large outlet to cover this case has been the Toronto Sun, with maybe 1 or 2 articles. We honestly thought that a Canadian fugitive wanted for the murder of a 20-year-old woman would be a bigger story in Canada, which is why we've decided to cover this case. So because of this, we reached out to Richard Emblin, the editor and director of the City Paper Bogota, which is Colombia's longest-running English newspaper. Richard agreed to do an interview with us and helped us to shape this episode, so we're super grateful for that, and that Richard took the time to speak to us about this case. We used Richard's articles and the interview to inform this episode, as well as several translated articles from El Tiempo, the Spanish-speaking Colombian newspaper. We also spoke to Travis Ridgen, a professional hockey player and host of the Slang in the Biscuit podcast. Travis became an unintentional witness and a good Samaritan in this case. He did his absolute best to alert the authorities and the media about the location of the main suspect. So as an additional content warning, this episode deals with gender-based violence, femicide, and a gruesome murder.
This case takes place in Medellín, Colombia. Medellín is nestled in the heart of the Colombian Andes Mountains and is a city of captivating contrasts and rich cultural heritage. Known as a city of eternal spring for its pleasantly mild climate year-round, Medellín boasts an inviting atmosphere and resort town feel. The city's diverse population, shaped by indigenous, European, and Afro-Colombian influences, contributes to its vibrant tapestry of traditions and customs, this making it a captivating destination for travelers seeking authentic cultural experiences. Over the years, Medellín has transformed, evolving from its tumultuous past to become a beacon of innovation and urban development. From its bustling city streets to its meticulously landscaped parks and public spaces, Medellín showcases a commitment to progress and improvement. Notable initiatives in transportation, infrastructure, and social programs have propelled the city forward, earning it global recognition for its innovative approach to urban renewal. Despite its challenging history, Medellín today stands as a testament to resilience and perseverance. While it once grappled with the presence of notorious drug cartels, notably the infamous Medellín cartel led by Pablo Escobar and the civil armed conflict that ended in 2016, the city has since risen above its troubled past. Today, Medellín offers visitors a blend of historical intrigue, cultural richness, and modern amenities. Medellín invites travelers to discover the spirit of a city reborn. Richard Emblin, the editor for the City Paper Bogota, helped explain some of the differences between Bogota and Medellín.
Well, she was actually Medellín, which is Colombia's second biggest city. So it's a much more of a tropical city. Bogota is a very it's a Colombian capital. It's a huge metropolis. It's like any other major Latin American metropolis. You have every walk of life, every type of individual here. It's a very big, bustling city. 5 a.m., everybody's up and running, trying to get as much done in the day as they can. The city tones down by like 10 o'clock, but really at the end of the day, Medellín is the second biggest city. It has 1.5 million, well, 1.8 million compared to 9.5. So it's a much smaller scale. It's a much warmer city. It's much tropical. It's a very patriarchal society in which it used to be a very conservative stronghold city. It's a very industrial city.
So very little has been released about who Laura was, but we have been able to uncover some details. Laura Lopera was a 20-year-old woman who we believe lived in the La Aurora La Libertad neighborhood in the west of the city. When Laura was just 17 years old, she gave birth to her daughter. She lived in a humble home and neighborhood with her mother, her brother, and her 3-year-old daughter. Laura was a post-secondary student who also worked part-time at a local clothing company. She was described by friends and family as outgoing, friendly, and kind. Photos of Laura online show a young, fashionable woman with a couple of tattoos and a bright smile with braces. We asked Richard what he knew about Laura and what life for her may have been like in modern-day Medellín.
Well, the Colombian media has been very detailed as to her profile. She died at age 20. She was a single mother. She left a 3-year-old girl called Maria Camila, orphaned, in the sense that one of these typical situations of a girl who doesn't really know who her father is or estranged from her father. Her mother is a seamstress, works in a small factory in Medellín as a clothes manufacturer. These are very humble people. She lived with her brother as well, Juan Manuel Lopera, as a student. And, she's a typical 20-year-old Colombian girl who's pretty attractive, probably outgoing, jovial, likes meeting people, probably felt that meeting foreigners would be just one opportunity, maybe to get out of the poverty cycle and to meet a foreigner that could offer some level of friendship. A lot of these girls don't meet foreigners just for sex. They like to establish relationships that maybe foreign men can give them advice as to eventually what they should do with their lives, what's the best way to eventually move to the United States or a country like Canada. United States being the preferred destination, clearly, because it's always top of mind with Colombians because of the closeness that this country has in terms of immigration.
Laura was working hard to make ends meet in a multi-generational household where every penny counts. When Laura was at school or work and her brother or mother was at work, she needed to pay for childcare. Add to that food, transportation, and rent. It all adds up really quickly. While Laura did maintain a social life, there was not a lot of extra cash around. Her mother may have been making about $800 a month with a full-time clothing factory job. Richard shares a little more on what life is like for some young women in Medellín.
A lot of these girls are studying nursing. They study practical jobs in training schools that will get them employment that could be beneficial in international countries like Spain, France, but mostly Spanish-speaking nations. But of course, there's always the option of, the US and Canada. So her profile has never implied, like the case of Valentina Tres Palacios, the Bogota DJ, that there was anything more in it than just establishing friendships and relationships on a foreign level with foreign men.
Before we move forward with this case, we need to talk about another recent case in Colombia. Throughout our interview, Richard mentions the murder of 21-year-old Bogota DJ Valentina Tres Palacios. Now, in January of 2023, she was found murdered, and her body had been placed inside of a suitcase. Her boyfriend, an American named John Poulos, fled the country but was eventually arrested by Colombian police in Panama. He now stands accused of femicide in Colombia. Now, this case comes up a lot in our conversation with Richard because Valentina's case and Laura's case have eerie similarities. Both were young Colombian women, both were found in suitcases, both were allegedly murdered by foreign white men, and both of those men fled the country. These murders have outraged Colombians, seeing their young women murdered by foreign men and thrown away in suitcases has caused a massive uproar, initiating responses from all levels of government. Which brings us to the man who Colombian authorities believe is the main suspect in the murder of 20-year-old mother Laura Lopera.
Jesse Gilbert Wiseman is a man in his 50s who up until recently had been living in Terrence Bay, Nova Scotia, just outside of Halifax. Jesse was originally from Iowa and then attended university in Louisiana. During his schooling, he played football and was a competitive wrestler. This is all we know about his early life. In 2001, he moved to Bathurst, New Brunswick, and began coaching high school girls wrestling. Eventually, he made the short journey to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where he continued to coach high school girls wrestling at the provincial level. He also coached at the Canada Games level and worked out of a wrestling club in the Lower Sackville area of Nova Scotia in the 2010s. As a coach, he was known to be skilled, but quick to anger. This anger is something that is also echoed by at least one of his 2 daughters and one of his ex-wives. We understand that he was divorced twice and has at least 2 daughters. One of his daughters spoke with Ian Fairclough at Saltwire Online. Under the promise of anonymity, she disclosed that her father was an abusive man who often pitted her against her sister. She went on to say that she was estranged from Jesse Wiseman and hasn't spoke to him in over 5 years. Her mother had divorced him over 20 years ago, and that was an acrimonious split. She described her father as someone who is very intimidating. He enjoys making people feel small. He was manipulative. He would try to pit my sister and I against one another or against our mom. She said Wiseman was violent in that he would throw things or punch holes in the walls, but he never threatened violence to us. Some of these sentiments were echoed by those who trained with Jesse. Again, according to an article by Ian Fairclough at Saltwire, one former wrestler stated, "He always just gave me the absolute creeps. He was always aggressive and he didn't really treat us like people." Another said, "There were definitely a lot of times he would get upset when he was frustrated. He didn't yell at you a lot, but it was a lot of quiet anger." Wiseman allegedly stopped coaching wrestling 5 years ago after several complaints from young female wrestlers about his behavior. Wiseman has also been employed as a registered nurse, but consented to having his license revoked in November of 2013 following 5 allegations of incompetence or professional misconduct between 2009 and 2011, which he did not contest. It is unclear what kind of work he did after that. Criminally, Wiseman does show up in court records after he threatened someone in a road rage incident. In August of 2021 on a Halifax street, Wiseman got out of his car after a driver honked at him. He threatened the person with a hammer while claiming to be a police officer. Those charges were later dismissed after he entered into a peace bond. Over the last few years, Wiseman has been spending his time in Central and South America, visiting and living in Ecuador, Guatemala, and Colombia. It is believed that Wiseman met Laura Lopera through a social media app in late 2023. We asked Richard what he knew about how they met.
Look, I think that a lot of another issue here. I think a lot of these young girls are very social media savvy. They all have their TikToks, their Instagrams. They all have apps for everything. It's very easy to establish a contact here. As if you have a dating app and say, "Hi, look, I saw your profile. I think you're really cute. I'm coming to Medellín. I'd love to meet you." And, I don't think, you probably think, well, he's a nice enough guy, he's mature, he's a foreigner, I'll go and maybe have a drink with him or have him taking me out for dinner. These kinds of small gestures in Colombia go a long way. So I think, well, obviously it was a dating app, and in Colombia, most dating apps, people would associate with Tinder, but it was a dating app. They say they established on a social media platform, so I presume it was that.
So we are now going to get into the timeline of what is believed to have happened to Laura Lopera. Laura met Wiseman on a dating app or social media app in late 2023. And it is believed that Wiseman was living in Guatemala or somewhere in Central America at the time. In November or December, he moved to Colombia and rented a 7-room apartment in the Villa Hermosa Comuna 8 area of Medellín. The romantic relationship between 20-year-old Laura and 50-something-year-old Wiseman lasted for 3 or 4 months. And at first, according to family, things appeared normal. Although Wiseman never visited the family home, he did meet Laura's mother one time at a restaurant when they all had a dinner together where he appeared quiet. Laura was splitting her nights between Wiseman's place and her family home. According to Laura's brother, Juan Manuel, there were many red flags in the relationship. Wiseman often forbade Laura from using social media apps and also became angry when she received messages from friends. By the end of January 2024, Laura began spending fewer nights with Wiseman and more time in her family home. A few times, Laura's brother recalls seeing Laura cry after receiving text messages from Wiseman. He stated, quote, "We don't know if she was being threatened by him, but she kept going to him. Sometimes she would tell my mother that she didn't want to go, and then she would stay at his house. But she never came forward and said that he treated her badly or anything." However, a friend of Laura's has recently come forward and mentioned that Jesse was violent towards Laura, sometimes even tying her up so she couldn't leave the apartment. So the timeline gets a little murky here. There's a couple of dates that have been shifting around as to when she actually went missing. So at first, it has been reported that on the evening of January 31st, 2024, Laura did not come home from work. However, her grandfather remembers her using his cell phone on February 3rd, where she proceeded to have a long conversation with Wiseman. Regardless, her family became concerned as they had not heard from her in the first few days of February. They reported her missing to the authorities, and missing women in Colombia is a serious situation, usually triggering a pretty fast response. So here is Richard with more on that.
There's been very limited information to protect the victim's rights, so they don't release everything. But she was reported missing. She was obviously had gone away that day to do an errand or had gone to see Wiseman. When she didn't come home in the evening, her brother immediately called the police and said, my sister's not home. This triggered alarms. This country is very careful that way. It's not like Canada or maybe the UK or the United States. You have to wait like 72 hours to file a missing persons report. A girl has gone missing in Medellín. That has to be looked at. Unfortunately, it's Colombia. So you have a lot of big vulnerable neighborhoods. Her neighborhood is quite vulnerable. I'm talking about, it's a neighborhood where there are gangs operating. This is a low-income household. Her mother probably makes less than 2 million pesos a month at an exchange rate of, 2,800 to the Canadian. So she's probably making 800 US a month. Laura, obviously, she was studying, but she probably hang out in the afternoon with friends in the park. It was kind of the life of kind of a young woman, and she's probably very concerned to get home in the early afternoon to pick up a kid. The daughter was obviously spending with the time with her mother or with a guardian because the mother worked. So she probably had to pay the guardian some extra cash every day. So it's a day-by-day struggle to get through the day, kind of financially. There's not cash floating around to splurge on anything. There's not like you're planning at December to have a trip, to the coast. No, it's a day. Miki is eking out a daily existence between your home, your friends, the people that you know, and people that you might want to meet that could open up avenues for you to broaden your horizons. So I think the case of Laura is just typical of a vulnerable young woman.
Over the next few days, it was unclear where Laura was, but the authorities did not find her. And at that time, the family was unable to reach Laura or Wiseman. A taxi driver who had been friends with Laura for over a decade came forward and told the family that he had actually spent the day with Laura on February 3rd. He even provided photos of the two hanging out. Then on February 3rd or possibly February 4th, he drove Laura to Wiseman's apartment. On February 10th, Laura's family asked the taxi driver to take them to Wiseman's place, and he obliged. Now, on that same day, the landlord at Wiseman's apartment began receiving complaints of a fetid smell coming out of Wiseman's place. The landlord then messaged Wiseman. Wiseman then responded, stating that he had to leave the country quickly due to a family emergency and that he would return to Colombia the following week. He said that the smell was because he had forgotten to take out the garbage and that he had forgotten to wash some dishes, but there were some pots soaking in a sink. The landlord then entered the apartment, and the smell was horrid. They very quickly went into the kitchen and took out the garbage. Now, just as the landlord was leaving the apartment, the Loperas arrived in the taxi and asked if they could enter the third-floor suite. The smell in the apartment was overwhelming, and the Loperas made their way through the residence. In the laundry room, they discovered a suitcase that was leaking with blood and organic matter. When they opened it, they found the badly decomposing remains of 20-year-old Laura Lopera. Immediately, they called the authorities, and investigators arrived at the apartment at 2:40 on February 10th. Early on in the investigation, a witness stated that they saw Wiseman enter and leave the suite several times on February 7th, but that he had not been seen since February 8th. The preliminary autopsy reports put Laura's time of death at February 4th, so about 6 days before she was discovered. The cause of death has not been released, but we can only imagine that it was a horrific and violent end. As piecing this timeline together has been difficult due to the fluid nature of the case, and also we are working with translated documents, we asked Richard what he knew about the timeline, as he is more on the ground in Colombia. Now, while some of the finer details differ, the larger details remain the same. So here's Richard with more.
On February 1st, Laura didn't come home. So the brother called the Medellín police and said, hey, my sister's not home. In Colombia, there's an almost immediate reaction. People start calling people, police start saying there's a woman missing in this neighborhood, and they start getting the feelers out to see, why didn't you come home? They start looking at Facebook pages, text messages, and start saying he did have, and it has been revealed that he had called while Wiseman was in Colombia from his apartment, and then he basically called her everything under the sun. She said, look, I don't want to talk like this. Why are you threatening me? He was obviously in an absolute fit of jealousy, because a lot of these men think that because they have money and they're 50, they purchase women and they are beholden to them for the rest of their lives. No, it doesn't work that way. This is a Latin culture. People are free. People move around. People make their own relationships, right? And so she was reported missing on February 1st. A taxi driver had dropped her off at Wiseman's apartment and confirmed, and the taxi driver actually came forward and said, I saw this girl, I dropped her off at this apartment, and that was the last time she was seen. So she went into his apartment. Well, the forensics on February 9th were called, the police were called to the house of the landowner, the woman landowner, because she would sense a terrible smell in the washroom area next to the garbage. So they went in. According to forensics, they believed that she would have been killed around the 4th of February, which means that she had already been missing for 3 days. So what happened in those 3 days was she was missing, but she could have actually been killed earlier. But they put the approximate date of death around that. So and then Wiseman leaves Colombia on February 9th. Now, what happens between the brother alerting the police saying my sister's not home and the actual date of the death? Well, we don't know. Chances are, I think she was already dead.
Within days of the discovery, the Medellín mayor, Federico Gutierrez, confirmed the investigation was now focused on finding Jesse Wiseman and emphasized the ongoing efforts with international authorities to apprehend Jesse Wiseman by engaging Interpol. Quote, he has already been identified. He left the country. Thanks to the joint work between our police authorities, we hope that an arrest warrant will soon be issued and executed through an Interpol alert. At this point, an Interpol Blue Notice was issued for Jesse Wiseman as a person of interest in the death of Laura Lopera. Interpol's full name is the International Criminal Police Organization, and they are an intergovernmental organization. With 196 member nations participating, they help police to work together to make the world a safer place. To do this, they enable the member nations to share and access data on crimes and criminals, and they offer a range of technical and operational support. There are 8 levels of notices that can be issued by Interpol. The highest level is a red notice. A red notice is to seek the location and arrest of persons wanted for prosecution or to serve a sentence that was already adjudicated before they fled. A blue notice is 3 steps below red. A blue notice is when Interpol is asked by a member nation to collect additional information about a person's identity, location, or activities in relation to a criminal investigation. It's important to note here that an Interpol Blue Notice does not mean someone will be arrested or detained. It does not mean that they are guilty. It simply means that a member nation is seeking information on an individual and their whereabouts. For example, if someone with a Blue Notice gets on a plane, they probably won't be detained. However, their travel itinerary may be shared with the authorities that are seeking that information. It should also be noted that red notices are publicly available to be searched, whereas blue notices are not.
As the investigation advanced, authorities learned that Jesse Wiseman left the Jose Maria Cordova Airport in Rio Negro, a municipal airport, and flew to Bogota on February 8th. This was 4 days after Laura's estimated time of death. Now, from there, he flew to Guatemala, and this is where the trail went cold. Investigators initially believed that he was heading to Turkey or even Thailand, specifically nations that did not extradite to Colombia. However, Richard broke the news that there was now an eyewitness who places Wiseman in Canada. Now, we spoke directly to this eyewitness, and we will get into that in the second half of this episode. But here's Richard with more on Jesse Wiseman's escape from Colombia.
Confirmed that Wiseman flew from Medellín to Bogota, which is a 45-minute flight. It's like, it's a regular hub. And then from Bogota, clearly left the country and boarded a flight to Guatemala, where apparently he had visited in the past and he knew quite a lot about Guatemala. It's a small country. People coming in, coming out, probably saying, look, I'm going to take the overland bus to Mexico City. And then he could have probably most likely, because there would not have been a direct flight, I don't think, from Guatemala to a major Canadian city. I could be mistaken, but it doesn't seem like it's the kind of airport that would do it. So anyway, that's kind of the timeline that we know. And then, of course, nothing happens. The guy goes. Colombian media starts saying that, like John Poulos, he's gone to Turkey, or he's gone off to Asia. But I think that would have been very complicated how you would get from Guatemala to Istanbul. You would have to go back to Panama. Panama, by that time, Panama and Colombia have a very close police relationship. They monitor a common border. They are two very strong kind of countries in the hemisphere, democratically elected governments. They check out for each other. So had he risked going back south, he probably would have become closer to Colombia's territory. He could have ended up being arrested at the airport again, or being arrested at the airport like John Poulos. So he probably did take an overland trip to Mexico City and then from there fly off to somewhere, Calgary or Vancouver, or I don't know. But the Colombian media claim, and they still insist, that he's not in Canada and that he's somewhere in Asia or in Turkey, which I don't believe, given the fact that we have this new video footage that was being handed to us.
So we're now going to take a quick break. When we return, we will look at the investigation and speak with the witness who placed the fugitive and accused murderer, Jesse Wiseman, in Canada. And we are back. So before the break, we outlined the life and tragic murder of Laura Lopera. Laura was a 20-year-old mother living in Medellín, Colombia, when she met a man in his 50s from Canada named Jesse Wiseman. Jesse Wiseman, a Canadian man in his 50s, moved to Colombia, and the two began a romantic relationship that went on for a few months. Then around February 1st, Laura was reported missing. This caused her family to enter Wiseman's apartment on February 10th, where they found the remains of their daughter, Laura Lopera, stuffed into a suitcase. Authorities reported that Jesse Wiseman had fled to Guatemala with the intention of going to Turkey or perhaps Thailand. However, a Canadian man traveling on a via rail train from Vancouver to Winnipeg had a run-in with a man who we believe, and he also believes, is Jesse Wiseman. We've obtained an exclusive interview with Travis Ridgen, a 27-year-old professional hockey goalie and the host of the Slang in the Biscuit podcast. Travis, who is originally from Winnipeg, was traveling home from Vancouver on the train, which left Vancouver on February 19th and was scheduled to arrive in Winnipeg on February 21st. Now, it was on the last night of this trip when he had the strangest encounter with who many believe is actually Jesse Wiseman. In fact, Travis recorded some of this encounter with Jesse Wiseman and uploaded it to YouTube. We will post that video and the link to it in our show notes.
So first off, we asked Travis why he was on board the train that day.
I'm actually a frequent train traveler. I love taking the train in Canada. So Yeah. I'm born in Winnipeg. I live in Vancouver. Travel in between quite frequently, and I love seeing Canada by train. So I'm a very frequent flyer. I think it was my 10th or 11th time on the train.
So Travis boarded the train at 3:30 p.m. on February 19th in Vancouver, heading to see family in Winnipeg. For those that have not taken the Via Rail train, it is a stunning way to see Canada, as Travis just mentioned. The train makes its way from coastal British Columbia through the Rocky Mountains and then on to the giant skies of the prairie provinces. The vibe on the train is similar to a cruise ship, with passengers sharing spaces, conversations, and meals while watching Canada pass by outside the windows. On the last night of this trip, the train was scheduled to arrive in Winnipeg after dinner service at 8:30 p.m. on February 21st. Like on cruise ships, you often find yourself sharing a dinner table with strangers or people you've met on your trip. This is usually a great way to meet new people and hear about their lives. But for Travis, this evening went south when he was seated with a stranger who seemed both intoxicated and to be a bit of an asshole.
So Travis was seated at his table before the dinner service began, and he pulled out his camera to quickly record the dining room. This is a quick 8-second video that was going to be part of a longer travel vlog. We have watched the very short video that Travis posted. Essentially, he pulls out his camera, showing the dining room car. Across from Travis on the left is a well-dressed man acting normal. This is a man who Travis had spoken to earlier on the trip, and the two got along. However, to Travis's right, but across the table from him, is the man that we believe to be Jesse Wiseman. Now, this man is wearing a baseball hat and sort of reading glasses. They're almost like reader glasses. And it seems as if there's maybe a wig coming out of the back of his hat. So he sees the camera and he gestures as if to say no, but then that turns into a bit of an awkward wave, like almost like a salute type wave. And then the man quickly looks down and to the left out the window away from the camera. It's quite odd. Now, of course, we don't want to read too much into an 8-second clip, but we're going to let Travis explain to you what happened at dinner that night after the first course was served.
Yeah, it was the final dinner before we arrived in Winnipeg. About an hour and a half outside Winnipeg. One of my favorite parts of the trip, too, by the way. And sat down for dinner with a gentleman in front of me that we've been talking most of the day. We had some really good conversation. Gentleman beside me, same thing. And then a gentleman to my far right, which you'll see on the video version of your show, hopefully. Never met him, but the train's great, though. You get to like immerse yourself in conversation with other people, meet people that you have no idea anything about, and really force like an old school nostalgic environment, which I also really like about it. A little bit of a time machine, if you will. And oh boy, what did we have? We had starters like salad and soup or whatnot. We're having a conversation. I was heading to Denver a couple days after that. And a gentleman to my far right had injected his opinions about altitude sickness and a bunch of like traveling tips and advice. And, as you can tell from the video, I'm a professional athlete. So when somebody who's, significantly overweight and doesn't play the part is trying to give me advice on sports and whatnot, like it's very, very hard to listen and even like pretend like I care. So I just told him, thank you very much for the advice. And he accused me of being very dismissive about it. And I said, listen, my friend, I don't know you. You're not a personal friend of mine. I'm a professional athlete. You're not. So like your opinion doesn't really hold any weight to mine. And I said it in the most polite, politically correct way I possibly could have at the time. And he was very bent out of shape by it. And, me and the other gentleman continued talking for a minute or so, whatever. The salad had come. And the gentleman who I'd gotten into this, argument with said he was going to excuse himself to the bathroom.
So after the awkward exchange with Travis about altitude sickness, the stranger gets up to use the bathroom, and what happened next was completely bizarre and disproportionate to the disagreement that the two men had over a dinner conversation.
And he had excused himself, got up, which would have been directly behind me. At the time, I remember I'm eating, right? I'm putting food in my face. And when he got up out of the chair, I wasn't looking at him, but I was looking down at my plate. And I received this overwhelming energy of, I think I'm about to be hit. Couldn't figure out why. Just this screaming intuition in the back of my head. I'm about to have an altercation on my hands. And I thought to myself, people, myself included, are paying $1,500, $2,000 a ticket to be on this train. It's a lot of elderly people. It's a very high, like classy environment. To have an altercation on here makes no sense. And this is all like decisions that are going on in my head, like split seconds. And so I dismissed myself and said, that's impossible. Yeah, I get it. He's upset that I didn't want to take his opinion on certain things. I mean, a lot of people are like that nowadays, but he's not going to hit me. So I continue eating, and as he makes his way around the corner, right when he's about parallel with me, and he's completely out of my blind spot, I felt him hit me in the side of the head. He just like sucker punched me right in the side of the head. And even though I felt this and I knew what happened, it took me probably 2-3 seconds to actually diagnose that this had actually happened. Because again, the people are very classy. It's a very high class environment, high ticket price environment as well. It doesn't really make sense. And then I look behind me, and the entire dining room, because we were right at the back of the dining room, everybody kind of like gasped, and everybody was looking. I could feel everybody's eyes on me. And I heard one of the VIA staff members behind me say, "That's unacceptable. Get out of here." And so I turned around and I looked at him. He's already running behind the staff member. And I thought to myself, do I do something about this, or do I just let it be, and do I be the bigger man? Well, he's significantly overweight and he's old. He's like, I don't know, like late 50s, mid 50s, whatever. Is like, if I'm going to take this into my own hands, is this worth my time? In the split second, I decided no. If I would have known later what the Winnipeg police had told me, I would have done something about it. But
it's important to note here that Travis is a 27-year-old. He's a professional athlete. He's 6'5", 207 pounds, and very fit. And this portly, older man decided to take his best shot at Travis, and obviously that's super shocking. Travis did the right thing by not striking back. In fact, he described the punch as a bit of a muffin, which for those uninitiated is a soft punch. But the action did not end there. When the train arrived in Winnipeg at 8:30 p.m., Wiseman was hauled off the train with the Winnipeg Police Service waiting for him on the platform.
So train arrives in Winnipeg 10-15 minutes later. We're separated on two separate parts of the train. We get off. They ask, "Hey, would you like to press charges?" I said, "Yeah, the guy's a dickhead. You don't go sucker punch somebody at dinner. Also, like, you ruined my trip, dog. Like, I'm trying to enjoy the Rocky Mountains, enjoy the prairies. I'm going home to see my family. Just ruin my trip. Like, I'm literally going to get off the train, and 15 minutes later, I see my mom. This is exactly what I'm going to have to deal with." I said, "Yeah, let's press charges." And so the Winnipeg police, after they'd come, had said, "Listen, here's the deal. With the way the criminal justice system is in Canada, if you want to press charges, we're going to write him up a sheet of paper, give it to him. He's going to be on his way. Nothing's going to happen. If you want to actually ruin his day, tell us you don't want to press charges. We have evidence that he's been drinking. We'll put him in the drunk tank for the night. He's off the train, and that's not a good place to be in tonight. They're very busy." And I said, "I'm going to take your opinion on it, since you're the professionals and I'm not. I would not like to press charges on the condition I could at a later date. Please put him in the drunk tank." So that's exactly what happened. Took him off the train. He was banned from the train, so I don't know how he was going to get going where he was going, because he'd mentioned he was heading to Toronto, which, going from Winnipeg to Toronto was a bit of a boot.
So we asked Travis how he knew that the man's name was Jesse Wiseman.
I would assume with the Interpol Blue Note that he wasn't going to be flying without getting flagged. He's not going to get a rental car without getting flagged, and he's not going to have a vehicle or any assets to drive. So the train makes sense, because when you book on the train, you don't have to show any identification unless you pay cash for a ticket at the counter. And he started in Vancouver with me. So I would assume, because one of the VIA staff members had mentioned his name, Jesse Wiseman, they had that information from his ticket, and they had that on his ticket because he paid cash, trying to be sneaky. And they said, "Sir, we need some identification. We can't give you a ticket cash." So he had to fork over his actual information.
At this point of the altercation, Travis did not know that Jesse Wiseman was wanted in connection to a murder in Colombia. As far as he knew, some jerk named Jesse Wiseman took a swing at him and was now going to spend the night in the drunk tank at the Winnipeg Police Service. However, Travis shared what happened with his girlfriend when he got home, and she went on Google to search the name Jesse Wiseman.
And so he's booted off the train. I went home, talking to my girlfriend the next day, and telling her the situation. She Googles him. Boom, this dude's wanted on Interpol Blue. He just murdered the suitcase killer, chopped up this 20-year-old girl last week. And at first I thought, come on, this isn't real. She sent in the Toronto Sun article. I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, like this is the guy. I had dinner with this guy last night. This is the suitcase killer. And so I immediately called the Winnipeg police, tell them everything. And they said, "Okay, yeah, we'll be in touch shortly." 2 days goes by, nothing. I called him back. And the dispatcher kind of accused me of being a conspiracy theorist. He said, "Sir, I would recommend you stop Googling things. We have all the information on our screen right here. There's nothing that pops up. Even if he was, we can't do anything about it. So, sir, just stop Googling things and go on with your day." And I said to the dispatcher, I said, "Listen, like, I'm not a fan of a lot of the mainstream news nowadays, but this is the Toronto Sun. Right? The Toronto Sun probably knows a thing or two what's going on. If this dude's an actual murderer, why don't we pay attention to this?" Told me again, I had a tinfoil hat on. I said, all right, whatever. See a couple other pieces pop up in the Colombian news. And then I'd actually bumped into a police officer, like a whole like force, like a team, like 2, 3 days later. And I mentioned in person all this information. I gave them the information. They were writing down notes, talked for like 20, 30 minutes. And I called back again 2, 3 days later. No, we have no updates, sir. Which I found absolutely crazy. And they also informed me because I said, okay, well, I'd like to press charges. And they said, sir, but the way the justice system is, you can't press charges. Like, unless short of you being part of the elderly and he beat your brains in, and nothing's going to happen. And I said, well, why? They said, well, first off, we can't really prosecute like assaults like this. Anyway, it is what it is. And, fast forward here 2 months, I haven't heard anything. This is the first time anybody's talking about it in a while. So it's kind of interesting to kind of brush up on my notes of what happened that night.
So Jesse Wiseman spent the night in the cells at Winnipeg Police Service and was released. Many people might think this is strange as he has the blue notice from Interpol. However, when someone is booked, their name is put through CPIC, which shows if they are wanted on warrants in Canada. It is rare to do an Interpol search on someone who is arrested for a public intoxication charge, especially as they were traveling on a domestic train. Also keep in mind that an Interpol blue notice does not give authorities the power to detain an individual. That would be a red notice. A blue notice is to collect additional information about a person's identity, location, or activities. However, Travis phoned the police station before Jesse was released to let them know he was a person of interest for a murder in Colombia, and they still released him. And the dispatcher essentially told Travis to get off the internet.
Well, I called him the next day. I mean, I guess it depends on what time of day they released him, but I called in the morning, so it would have been around the time they had him. And I mentioned, my girlfriend saw there was a Interpol blue notice. So I did, dispatch that information to the dispatcher, and they would have had the ability to do whatever they willed with it. And again, I'm very curious. I would love to know. Even if they let him out, it was a very, very short period. I must have called around like 10 in the morning. So I don't know, maybe they released him at 11, 10. You have that information. You know where, he's on foot. He doesn't have a car. So not that hard to, hey, just go check where he walked out of. We can go bring him back here. So again, so bizarre, especially with, how crazy Canada is with crime right now and how big this story is over down in the South. It blows my mind.
Now, Travis didn't just let this go. He phoned the station back several times, but was only able to get limited information.
Correct. That's what the police did tell me. I ended up asking, the same question about 30 different ways, and they said, well, I can confirm the suspect did spend the night here. He was in our custody overnight, and we did release him the following morning. And I said, well, what's happening with him? They said, we can't tell you. And then I got down the rabbit hole of, like, I wonder what he's doing. Like, where is he going to go? How is he going to get there? He's definitely on a no-fly list, I like to think. He's on the no-train list, so he can't board the train. They know what he looks like, right? And there's only like a certain amount of people that work at the Winnipeg train station here. So, like, I'm still very curious what he did. I would like to know.
Before we let Travis go, we wanted to get a little more information in regards to what this man who is believed to be Jesse Wiseman was like, and whether or not he divulged any of his upcoming travel plans to Travis.
Very suspicious. Like, there was an energy about him, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it sitting at dinner, but it definitely wasn't the normal environment, atmosphere and energy that most people have. Most people are very excited. Most people are older, taking the train. I'm definitely by far one of the youngest on the train. Most people are excited to talk about the scenery from the day, or talk about history, or their kids or their careers or whatnot. And he did not embody any of that energy whatsoever. Very quiet. The gentleman beside me said that he'd seen him talking with somebody else about wrestling. That he was heading towards Nova Scotia. Obviously, him being a wrestling coach makes sense. But he'd spent 90%, 95% of the trip sitting in his cabin the entire trip. So. That also checks out with being very suspicious of, just coming out for meals and coming back. I hadn't seen him in the dome car at all the entire trip, so that also makes sense and checks out.
So aside from the video evidence, we wanted to know if Travis had any other details that confirm the identification of the man we believe is Jesse Wiseman, who the Colombian authorities believe is responsible for the murder of 20-year-old Laura Lopera.
A couple of things. So he had mentioned verbally to me that he was heading towards Toronto. That was his getting off point, starting in Vancouver. One of the other guys mentioned that, like I said, he was talking about heading more towards Nova Scotia, and that he was from Nova Scotia. It might have been New Brunswick, one of the two, somewhere on the East Coast, which the train does go towards that direction. The wrestling as well, because he was talking with the guy who had like a wrestling shirt on. I guess, I don't know, some type of college wrestling. That also checks out. The VRL staff uttering his name, Jesse Wiseman, and by some weird coincidence, if he had like a weird spelling of Jesse, a weird spelling of Wiseman, I never would have figured it out, but because it's so straight and forward, I was able to, send it over to my girlfriend. She figured it out, found it very easily. And then the police did confirm, yeah, Jesse Wiseman, this is the guy. Yeah, okay, took his information down, blah, 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 from somewhere in Nova Scotia. So everything checked out. And then also when I saw the photos on his Facebook page where he had posted about, moving to Medellín, all these other things, all those photos looked like him. And then even though, and I wish I would have recorded it on a better camera setting on my phone. I recorded like a wide angle lens. If I had it on like the better lens, it would have been a little bit more clear. But even on that lens, you can see that's the same facial structure as the guy. He has a dinosaur looking face. And I remember like even just like visually seeing his face, that is the guy. Like there's like a very, like it's a very strategically shaped face. So there is zero doubt in my mind that is the guy. That's 100% the suitcase killer. And to the dispatcher that told me I was a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist, man, shame on you, because there's an innocent girl who is dead and her family is struggling with that. And you had the ability to pass off that information to do something about that. So I don't know who the guy is, but hey, shame on you.
Shame on them indeed. So we have a suspicious man who paid cash for his ticket using the name Jesse Wiseman. He hung out in his cabin the whole trip. He wore a wrestling shirt and stated he was going to Nova Scotia and used to be a wrestler. The Via Rail staff also referred to him as Jesse Wiseman. His name was also confirmed by the Winnipeg Police Service, and not only that, but Travis has the guy on camera, and he looks identical to Jesse Wiseman, the man wanted for this murder in Colombia. But since he has been released by the Winnipeg Police Service, there have been no more public sightings of Jesse Wiseman. We want to take a quick second to say thank you to Travis for doing all he did for Laura Lopera and her family. It's a shame that his evidence was seemingly brushed off. Making things worse, Travis has also sent this information to every major media outlet in Canada, including the CBC, and none of them chose to run a story about it. So maybe shame on them too. The only articles to feature his story are in Colombia, and there is one on saltwire.com from Atlantic Canada. Richard has also been pretty shocked by the lack of media attention in Canada and beyond. He refers to this as an eerie silence.
I think, and I go through this in my mind a lot as a journalist. I'm constantly thinking about the story because I think there's been an absolute silence, an eerie silence on this case. When John Poulos, the Americans were all over it. American media was just jumping fascinated by an American investor who falls in love, gives donations in cash, or via, the wire transfer to a Bogota sultry DJ, Valentina, and then strangles her, and they get, it's a whole sordid, really complicated murder. But of course, and it was vicious, but it was clear that he was getting involved with a very murky group of people. And it was very evident. It was a big story. This one has gone completely under the radar. Colombian police are not saying anything. Nothing. The Canadian government's not saying anything. You publish, go live, you tweet, you post, you write. Everybody sees the article. As a media in Colombia, we're very influential, even though maybe not everybody speaks English, but they know what we're saying. I mean, we're read from the presidency down. And I find it incredible that we have this video footage. We have these images taken by our source on the video rail too. It's clear now when you really look at the photograph and the eye distance and the lip formation and everything. This is the guy. And nothing. I mean, he's probably, headed to Nova Scotia now or hanging out in a hotel in Toronto. But I do believe, and this is where Colombia's history with law enforcement is so deep, from the drug traffickers Colombia's had to find and track down internationally, the whole security relationship with the United States in terms of intelligence gathering, intelligence sharing, profiling, hacking, like getting into deep cartels. They're going to get this guy. I mean, There's no doubt. The problem is, I have a funny feeling that Wiseman could actually live many years undetected in Canada.
Meanwhile, back in Colombia, the investigation continues. At the crime scene, investigators put all of the pieces together. Laura was found inside of a suitcase, and the evidence showed that she had died a violent death. DNA evidence at the scene connects Wiseman to the body and the murder. The police also found text messages from Wiseman to Laura that depict an abusive relationship. But one of the most damning messages was a voicemail from Wiseman where he is yelling at Laura in broken Spanish, possibly using Google Translate to convey his anger. Here's that clip.
Puta madre, dije, si tú vienes, yo voy a tener a tu abuelo por Western. Te dije, viene y hablaremos y yo voy a resolver los problemas. Y soy puta enojado ahora contigo. No me escuchas, no me Debes escucharme. Venga. Y vamos a resolver todos. No me hablas por puta WhatsApp y queja y dije, debes entender, blah, 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 blah. Párate.
So we are not Spanish speakers, but we have relied on newspapers and Google Translate to help us to understand what Wiseman is saying. We have some of those loose translations here. So in El Tiempo, they reported that the message said as follows. Slut mother, I told you to come, we're going to have your fight. I told you, come, let's talk, and I'm going to solve the problems, and I'm fucking angry with you. You don't listen to me. You don't listen to me. You must listen to me. Come on, and let's solve all this. Don't talk to me on fucking WhatsApp and complain and complain. And I said, oh, you must understand. Blah, 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 blah. Stop. The City Bogota reports the following translation. And this is directly from their website. It says, the investigation has revealed an audio clip purportedly capturing Wiseman verbally threatening the young woman. In the recording, he can be heard using offensive language saying, I'm fucking angry with you. You don't listen to me. You must listen to me. Come and let's resolve everything. Don't talk to me through damn WhatsApp. This distressing message, as well as others in the hands of investigators, raise questions about the abusive nature of the relationship and the verbal threats the victim may have received. Now, the Toronto Sun reported the message as follows, and it was a really kind of redacted version. Their reporting says, quote, he yells, I'm fucking angry with you. You don't listen to me. You must listen to me. Come, let's resolve everything. Don't talk to me through damn WhatsApp. So we asked Richard what his thoughts are on the motive in this case.
So he obviously felt very jealous. And he obviously made it clear to her. He was angry that she was not giving him the attention he required. But of course, it's very difficult for a 20-year-old girl, single mother, who probably has her baby or young child in daycare or in a guardian's house, who has to pay for that time, and looking for opportunities for work, to try to juggle her domestic life, her mother's financial problems, all in the same household. What the food, and all the trips he's done around the world, and the money he has, kind of harassing her on WhatsApp, saying, "Where are you? I need to see you," and all this kind of stuff. So that makes me think that she was really quickly trying to distance herself from this guy, and of course, the more she distanced herself from him, the more angry he became until he finally killed her. So I think that's really the psychology behind all of this. I think this man is a dangerous criminal. I think he's on the run. I think he calculated it. I think he was much more sadistic than John Poulos. I think he bludgeoned her to death. And he's 2 weeks later, he's sitting in a dining car in the Via Rain, in the Via Rail, enjoying a 3-course meal in a restaurant in Germany that probably cost 3,000 Canadian. So it's very cruel, and it's much more sadistic and heartless.
As the investigation into Laura's murder continues, the manhunt for Jesse Wiseman also continues. In Colombia, the crime of femicide is taken very seriously. Lawmakers voted overwhelmingly to pass a bill that defines into law the crime of femicide. The killing of a woman by a man because of her gender carries a prison sentence of 20 to 50 years. The new legislation gives longer sentences for perpetrators of psychological, physical, and sexual attacks against women because of their gender. The bill was named after Rosa Elvira Celi, a woman who was raped and murdered by a man in a park in the Colombian capital, Bogota, in May of 2012. The attack sparked national outrage and prompted thousands to march in the capital's streets. Her attacker pleaded guilty and received a 48-year prison sentence. With the backdrop of the murder of Bogota DJ Valentina Tres Palacios by American John Poulos, combined with the human trafficking of young women related to the sex trade, the mayor of Medellín stated, "Not another one. What sadness and pain it produces to know about another femicide. The victim is Laura Isabel Lopera, barely 20 years old." In the last few years, Colombia has put many rules in place to combat predatory foreign men who seek the attention of young Colombian women. Colombia does not want to be a sex tourism destination. Here's Richard with more on that.
Creepy foreigners that are coming to Colombia for sex tourism. Now, Colombia has a very organized travel and tourism sector. So they've had huge campaigns in hotels and hostels to make sure, very vigilant of the type of men that are walking into the hotel room lobby. If you walk into a hotel in Cartagena, a beautiful 5-star hotel, with a girl, is 18, trust me, the concierge will pick up the phone, call the nearest police station, say, "I have a hotel guest that just took what looks to be a young woman up to his bedroom." And immediately, you're going to get the hotel will be fine. You're going to be a lot of problems with that change, the hotel change. Of course, the man will be taken if they can prove. And Colombia, everybody has to have an ID card on you permanently. It's called a cédula. It's your residency number or your citizenship number. We foreigners have our own color compared to the Colombians. You have to have it on with you at all time. But of course, and so the police can stop you and say, "Hey, what's your age?" If you're under 18, you don't have a citizenship card. You don't have an ID card. It's only when you turn 18. So if you're with a minor in Colombia and they stop you, the cops stop a foreign man on the street and ask to see the girl's ID, then she doesn't have one, and she's 17, 11 months, and 30 days old, you're in big, big trouble.
Right now in Colombia, a family is grieving. Laura's mother, brother, and child are left without justice. The community she lived in and the country she called home are left without any closure. The pain of another Colombian woman thrown out like trash without justice has been hard on many. We asked Richard about the impact of Laura's murder, not only on her family, but on Colombia and Canada's global reputation.
Well, the brother said that the household was absolutely devastated, that the little girl keeps asking for her mother. The 3-year-old, Maria Camila, doesn't know where her mother is. She cries all the time. It's devastated the whole household. As I go back to this, regardless of what maybe could have been involved, nothing justifies what this man did. It's just cruel and heartless. And I think that, yes, it's devastated a family. It's probably devastated a community. It's once again a sign that for many of these foreign men, Colombian women are just disposable. They're trash. They can be thrown out in a suitcase or thrown out with the garbage. There's an absolute complete lack of humanity. These are very vulnerable people. I think one thing also is very shocking in this case is these people in cities like Medellín and Bogota, these young girls, they have a hard enough time trying to kind of get through the day, pay for the bus transport, pay for childcare, pay for the food on the table, keep their mother out of hospital, keep the brother, keep some kind of a family unit together. And then on top of this, we have these men who think that they can buy anything and they can buy people and it's just a transaction. And everything comes down to a monetary transaction. There's no sense of empathy. People are just disposable. It's third world. Oh, so what? It's Colombia. They just, these women, they're trash. We can get rid of them. We can kill them. because they're poor. And I think that's, I'm not leveling off here different levels of homicide because you're rich. No, but it's particularly poignant when people are poor because they're already victims of so many other circumstances in their lives, right? Whether it's financial marginalizations, whether they're in a country like Colombia, where in some ways they've still been victims of an internal conflict. We don't know much about these people. Migrations in Colombia are huge. People have moved from one city to the next because of the internal war. People lose people because of gang violence. People lose people because of kidnapping. People lose people because of, organized crime. And then on top of this, creeps and killers that are coming to the cities to haunt these to prey on these young people at night and or during the day. I just think it's just absolutely. And as they go back again, I mean, if I were the Canadian police, I would be really like trying to move with the evidence I have and trying to come up with results. It's quite sad also for that Canada being such a marvelous, fantastic, gorgeous country with such fantastic people can't actually kind of like do something. Like it seems I don't know what's going on. So that's my humble opinion on all of this.
Obviously, in Canada, we are far away from this case and the Colombian justice system. However, we asked Richard how our listeners could help.
I just think it's to be aware that actions have consequences. I think many times people travel to foreign countries without understanding the mechanisms of each specific country they're visiting. That I think Canadians overall are very caring, very empathetic peoples. I think that's what separates Canadians from many other countries, from peoples around the world. I think not much that Canada can do. If you spot a suspect, if you identify him, well, great. That's obviously a small step. We got that video from our source because somebody had taken the bravery and the guts to contact me as the English language media in Colombia and say, look, I think what Canadians can do, I think Canadians can be on the lookout. I think Canadians should be aware that they hear a name like Jesse Wiseman, that he is wanted for the murder of a young woman in another country. I think they should also realize that their actions, there will be justice. Somebody will get him, whether it's the Colombians with the help of the Canadians or Colombians with the help of any other country. But one thing is for sure, he's cornered. He's cornered. And I think that foreign men, like Canadian men, women, but I think mostly when it comes to men, should be extremely careful what they think and how they act in a country like Colombia, because this is not the kind of country that just forgives and forgets, right? This country has had a long-standing history with conflict, and Colombians are highly trained professionals in the military, in the army, and the police. They'll get Jesse Wiseman. I have no, but it might take some time. I think that's what's going to happen.
Before we wrap this episode, we wanted to share Richard's kind words about the work of independent media like True North True Crime and the work of individuals like Travis, who go out of their way to find and share information. As the landscape of media continues to change, it was interesting to hear what a veteran of the Colombian media had to say.
No, Graham, to be honest with you, I think it's fantastic what you're doing. And I think my thoughts are that so much of what we're seeing in crime prevention and tracking down missing persons and finding missing persons and alerting communities about what's going on is being done at a grassroots level in journalism, such as your podcast, such as the initiative by this man who reached out to us with this video of the alleged suspect on the Via train, or Jesse Wiseman, us as a expat community media company that specializes in keeping foreigners informed as to what's going on in Colombia. I think that the sad thing is that the large traditional media that we're seeing out there, the big networks, the big national newspapers, are not reacting. But that cannot exclude stories that have a direct impact on communities, on people, on the efforts. For example, this story about Jesse Wiseman, I think it's something Canadians should know. And I'm just dumbfounded, again, to use the same word, that I'm not seeing any response in the big Canadian media. Globe and Mail, CBC, nothing. Silence. It's like, it happened in Canada, so what? And that's sad, because I think that we need more media companies and more publications like yours to actually make an impact.
We agree with Richard, and we want to add that we cannot do this podcast without you, our amazing listeners. Your ongoing support of this podcast keeps us going in so many ways. By sharing our episodes, social media posts, and telling a friend about True North True Crime, you help us to get these stories out to a wider audience. Right now, this case is getting very little attention. We ask that you please help us by sharing this episode and sharing Jesse Wiseman's photo. Jesse is not at this moment guilty of any crime. The Colombian authorities simply would like to speak to him in connection to the death of Laura Lopera, but today he remains on the run.
Laura Lopera was a 20-year-old single mother at the start of her adult life. She was found brutally murdered and stuffed in a suitcase. There has been no justice for Laura or her family. As of this recording, there is only an Interpol blue notice for Jesse Wiseman. So if you see Jesse, we encourage you to call your local police. If his Interpol notice changes to red, you can contact Interpol directly. We will post any updates regarding this case on our socials. We want to thank Richard Emblin, the editor and director for the City Paper Bogota, for helping us with this episode, as well as to Travis Ridgen at the Slang and the Biscuit podcast for taking the time to speak with us and recording that very important footage of Jesse Wiseman on the Via Rail train. We wish luck to Travis on his new team and hope he has a great season in Spain. We will be back soon with a new episode. Until then, stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe.